But if you would this morning, open with me to 1 Timothy chapter 2. Now, where we get to that portion of Scripture or not, I don't know. I have some things that I simply want to share from my heart about what this country has been going through. You know, normally, a Memorial Day, Veterans Day, or the 4th of July are not that difficult of message for me to get up. But for whatever reason, it has been a struggle for the past couple of weeks. There have been mornings that I have sat in the study to 2, 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, just agonizing with God as to what needs to be said, what can be said. Sometimes I've worried about saying too much. I have a tendency to do that sometimes, and sometimes I've struggled with not saying enough in fear of offending someone. But I think the reason that I have had such a tremendous difficulty in coming to the message that I want to bring today and quite possibly next Sunday, I think it has to do with the environment that is so prevalent in our nation today. We live in one of the most politically charged times of my life. I've never seen things as they are today. And I agree 100% with Butch in his prayer. This is not about race. Never has been. There seems to be a hatred that permeates every area of our lives. And the sad thing is that most that you talk to cannot tell you who, what, or why they feel the way they do. They just feel that way. And I know that we have all heard the political aspect of it. We have all heard the news commentators as they make their analysis, as they reach their conclusion as to what is fueling all of these feelings in America. But I think that the biggest problem we face is that there is a spirit that the Bible predicts will manifest itself in the last days. That it will reveal basically what we are seeing in our nation today. There is an evil, hateful, hurtful, wicked spirit that dominates and drives men to act the way they act and do the things they do. This was the spirit that Paul warned Timothy about in the second chapter or the third chapter of 2 Timothy, the first 5 verses. Paul says, "And know this also, that in the latter days perilous times shall come." Now, basically, that word perilous means dangerous. But that word also means evil, hurtful, wicked times. It is that same spirit of warfare that Paul wrote the church of Ephesus about in chapter 6, verses 10 through verse 20, where Paul says, "We war not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers and against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." That is the spirit that we are engaged with today. It's not men and women. There is an unseen force that is dominating the scenes of this world. And we need to be aware of that. I want to share something that I have got a hold of in the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks, that has really upset me. I do not know where any of the other pastors have received this, but it gives us an idea of what is taking place in our country. The article that I received simply expresses their anger. Their thoughts are that patriotic services have no place in church. That the American flag that we have just pledged our allegiance to has absolutely no place in church. God help us. If we as the people of God cannot come together as a church family and pledge our allegiance not simply to a flag, but to the country and the God that has made it all possible. But that is what we're dealing with today. That is the spirit. Now, I know that the attitude that I received this week, and that person knows exactly how I feel, and there will be further discussions about this. But I know that they are funded basically by 3 organizations. One of them is the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is about the most ungodly force that is prevalent in this nation today. The other is a group that calls themselves Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. And the other is an organization that calls itself Americans United for the Separation from Religion. Their main goal is to eliminate God. Their main purpose is to eliminate any form of allegiance to Him. There have been discussions by certain politicians of eliminating crosses across the landscape of this nation because they have become offensive. Not only do they want to take them out of national parks, they want to take them off of roadways, they want to take them off of churches. And if you have paid attention in the past few months, this is something that is happening today in China. They are removing all crosses. There are some Christian churches in China, but they are removing all crosses. Any recognition of God. That's what we're dealing with today. And I thank you for allowing me just to get that off of my heart. You know, I kind of feel like some of the Old Testament prophets, and I'm certainly not a prophet, but it talks about the burden that God placed upon their heart. I was reading in the book of Amos, and it said the burden of the Lord came to Amos. The burden that God did show Habakkuk. And I think with all of my soul that God has placed a burden upon my heart for this great nation in which we live. And I hope that I can share that this week and next week as we look at what Paul says to Timothy. As we stand here this morning looking over the almost 244 years that this nation has been in existence, much like the nation of Israel, the United States of America has had a great and glorious beginning. No one can ever deny that the hand of God was not upon the founding fathers as they met 244 years ago and declared our independence from Britain. No one could deny that. And even 150 some odd years earlier, as the first pilgrims landed on these great shores, the first thing that they did was to build a church. The first thing that they did was fell on their face before God, thanking Him that they have arrived where He wanted them to be. So actually, this country goes back 156, 160 years more than its birthday. We have an enormous history that we should never, ever lose sight of. It bothers me as I talk to the younger generation that when you ask them specific questions about certain men and certain things, they have not a clue of what you're talking about. Things that you and I learned that are valuable to the history of this great nation. Now, America has never been perfect. She has made a lot of mistakes. And if this country survives another 244 years, she will still be imperfect. She will still be making mistakes. But she has always risen higher, and she has always gone out of her way to make things right. Only a great nation can rise above her struggles and her adversities and come out the stronger. And if you go back and look at the 244-year history of this great nation, you can find that there was struggle after struggle after struggle, and yet she came through every one of them. She has been successful. She has risen above all of the animosity and hatred that other countries seem to have. America has ministered to the entire world. She has fed more of the world's hungry than any other nation on the face of this earth. She has clothed the world's naked. She has sheltered the world's homeless. She has nursed the world's sick and dying. She has comforted the hurting and the discouraged. When hurricanes and earthquakes and tsunamis ravaged other parts of the world, America was the first nation to show up on all of these scenes. She was the first to respond, to offer hope and help and resources, and not one time did she ever send anybody a bill. Did she ever say, what is in it for us? That is the nation of which you and I are a part of. That is the nation which God started 244 years ago. And I thank God to be a part. The United States of America has fought more of the world's battles than any other nation. But when she is facing her own difficulties, when she is going through the turmoil that we are seeing today, where are those that she rose up to help? Where are those that she ministered to, that she fed, that she clothed, that she comforted and cared for? It seems that we are left to fight our own battles, while the other nations of the world just wag their heads and wonder what in the world is going to be the outcome. But we will survive. We will survive. We will come stronger. We will be more resilient, and we will be more resolved than we have ever been at any time in our lives. Our God is bigger than the virus that we are fighting, of the unrest that we are dealing with in this nation. God is bigger, and God is bigger than the devil himself, that is the instigator of all the turmoil that we are seeing. And I thank God for the privilege of having been born and raised in this great nation. I do not feel like I owe any person an apology for where God chose for me to be born. I do not feel like I owe any person an apology for the color of my skin in which God himself chose that I should be born. I do not owe anybody an apology. Nobody. We live America will survive. I believe that. Now, to be sure, I believe with all of my heart that God had as much a hand in bringing this country into existence as he had in bringing the nation of Israel into existence. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that America has taken the place of Israel. No, no, no. That will never, ever happen. Israel has been, is, and will forever be God's chosen people. Amen. God's promise to the nation of Israel, I will never break my covenant with you. That is God's promise, that he would never break his covenant with Israel. And I still believe that God will bless those who bless Israel, and God will curse those who curse Israel. And America right now is treading an awful thin line. And we need to be very careful. Israel will always be. But God promised to Israel, back in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verses 1 through verse 3, God made a promise to Israel through Abraham. Now the Lord hath said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and out from thy father's house unto the land that I will show thee. And I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and I will make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse them that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families be blessed. That's the promise that God made to the nation of Israel. God said, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make you a great people, that all of the other people of the world is going to be blessed. Now that was God's promise to Israel, and he kept it. And Israel became a nation that was revered and respected as well as hated among the other nations of the world. But then when you go back into the book of Exodus, into the book of Deuteronomy, into the Psalms, God laid down certain stipulations and certain requirements that if Israel kept those stipulations, that she would forever be a great nation. Now we know that she failed and she did not keep and honor what God has said. Now folks, my point is that I want to share with us this morning. Only God can make a nation great. Only God. Only the people of that nation can keep that nation great as we are obedient to the words of God. That's basically what he was telling Israel. He said, I've done this, this, and this. I have made you a great nation. Now, whether or not you remain great is up to you. And folks, I think that's the same message that God is trying to tell us today. That is the same message. God has made America great. God has set this country head and shoulders above the nations of the world, not that we could relish in our pride and arrogance, but that we should honor God. And when we fail to do that, then we cease to be the nation that God has created. Sometimes the nation of Israel, they honored those requirements. And they experienced the blessings and the bounty of God. Sometimes they failed. And they bore the consequences. Could this be what we are seeing in our nation? Is this the call of God that started with a pandemic and is going to end in a protest? Is God trying to wake this nation up? Is God trying to shake us and say, look at what I have done and what you are doing? God expects from us. We have enjoyed God's providence, His protection, His power, and His promises for so long. We have a responsibility. As we come back next week, I figured all I would get through was the introduction. As we look at the things that Paul lays out to Timothy, the requirements that they were to live up to if they were going to continue to enjoy. The title of my message, by the way, is Keeping America Great. I'm not trying to make a political statement, but God has stipulated in His Word there are certain things that have got to be a part of a people's life, of a nation's life, if they are to continue to enjoy the blessings of God. I know the statement that I'm about to make is not going to be politically correct. And I'm usually not politically correct on too much. But America is the greatest nation in the world. America was not founded as a Muslim nation. America was not founded as a Hindu nation. America was not founded as a Buddhist nation. America was founded as a Christian nation. And that's where we ought to keep it. And God has laid down certain stipulations and requirements that if this nation is going to continue to enjoy the goodness and the blessings of God, if it's going to continue to be a great nation, then these things have got to be a part of our life. So you pray. I'm still struggling. You pray that God would just use this. I don't know what God's trying to do with me in this. I really don't. He and I have had some serious talks about 2:30 in the mornings a lot of times. God, what are you trying to show me? What do I need to say? What do our people need to hear? I think that we have that message that we can get into next week and hopefully conclude. There, Paul mentions three things that are absolutely necessary, not only for a church, but for a nation to remain great. These three things are absolutely necessary. Would you join? You don't have to come forward. I think it's time that we as a church got serious about praying for this nation. I'm not simply saying, God bless America. I'm not simply saying a prayer of that. I'm talking about getting on our knees before God. And we turn our lives and our country over to Him. That we lift up our political leaders. That we pray for them. I don't agree with a lot of stuff that's going on in this country. I pray for our political leaders. I pray for them. I pray for some of them to be saved because I think they're lost to the goose. I think they're lost. And they cannot know the wisdom of God. They cannot know. If you will, just join me in prayer. If you want to come forward, that'll be great. This will be our invitation.